Hey, John here. In today's lesson, I'm going to help you solve two big problems when it comes to legato. The first one is pull-offs, and if you're not some freak of nature, you probably have bigger issues with pull-offs than hammer-ons. The second one is developing the ability to go from string to string without it being glaringly obvious to anyone who listens. Either one of these can completely destroy that smooth sound that you want from your legato. The good thing, it's easily fixable. I'm going to show you two solutions now that help me and hundreds of my students. If you want tabs for the lick that I played in the beginning, you can find a link in the description below. We're going to start with the pull-off problem. And if you look at this fingering, we have 1, 2, 4 starting on the 5th fret, so we got 5, 6, 8. Now, when we do a hammer-on, it's no issue, because when you go from note to note, when I go to that note, this finger just played, so I put this finger down, and now that finger sounds. When I go from this finger to this finger, now that finger sounds. It's very logical for our brains. So wherever you are, there you are, right? But when it comes to pull-offs, that's not the case. So if we look at it now from the pull-off perspectives, we need to start here on the pinky. So we're going to go 4, 2, 1. Now, when I start playing here, so however you start playing this note is kind of irrelevant because the pull-off starts at the second note. So this note is ringing, and then I do the pull-off. Now this note is ringing, but I move this finger. And then when I go from this finger to this finger, same thing happens. So we're kind of one finger removed from the sound the whole time. So I think that's one of the big issues people have with pull-offs, because you get the timing is a bit weird because you're always one finger removed. So you don't really get that one-to-one connection that you would get with the hammer-ons, for example. Now the only real way to solve that properly would be to do all hammer-ons. But a lot of people are not comfortable with that technique, and it doesn't work well on acoustic, so it's not necessarily the best solution. But what we can do to mitigate this, though, is to actually look at the technique itself and what we can do about it. So one thing that really helps is to make sure that we prepare the next note as we play the previous note. And that might sound confusing, but this is what I mean. So when I go from the 5th fret, on the high E string, and then I'm going to go down to the same fingering here. We're going to have 8, 6, and then 5 as well. So basically we have this scale pattern. If I play it at a few repetitions and see if you can see what I mean here, if you can notice anything. So what I did here is that whenever I change strings, the first two fingers that are going to play on that string, they come down together, and not even slightly apart, they go down exactly at the same time. So if I play that again, notice 4 and 2 now, so these two fingers, they will go down at the same time at the string change. So I start here. And this is a significant thing, and I'm going to explain why. So what makes this so significant is that by doing this, you actually reduce one of the rhythmic problems a lot, because this tends to happen for a lot of us when we started out with pull-offs. I know it was the case for me, and I've seen it with countless students as well. So if we start from this note, for example, so just right at the string change, if you do this, if we have 3 notes, 1, 2, 3, and you go 1, that's fine, 2, that's fine, and then now to do a pull-off, you need to put this finger down and you get no sound, and then you do the pull-off. And the problem with that is that we get 4 movements, 1, 2, 3, 4, but only 3 notes, 1, 2, 3. So as you probably understand, this makes this problem even bigger. But it's a very common thing when it comes to pull-offs. So to get around that problem, you should focus on doing what I did here. So basically, you simply make sure that whatever finger is going to be the second note on that string goes down at the same time as the first finger. So in this case, the first finger is going to be the pinky and then the second finger. So those should go down at the same time. Because what happens then, we have 1, 2, 3. We have 3 motions and we have 3 notes. And now, even though we still have that same problem of moving one finger and getting another finger to sound, at least we've minimized the potential issues going forward. And now you might wonder, well, what about the index finger in this case? Well, I found that that actually tends to work itself out. So if I go like this, as long as I get these two together, the index finger tend to just follow along. But I've also practiced this when I'm on a single string. I try to make sure that I keep this preparation going at all times. So I do the pull off to the second finger, and at the same time as I do that, that's where I put down the index finger. So at the most here I will have 2 fingers down at a time. So I try to avoid this. We have 3 fingers down, and you just release it and hope for the best. And while you might think that you will play a slight bit slower when you're not putting all the fingers down as you can, the trade-off is that you're going to be able to move around much easier because you're not stuck to the fretboard in the same way. One thing to keep in mind when you practice like this is that you need to keep the tempo slow so you can actually focus on the correct technique and getting the fingers down in time. So give this a try on any of the legato stuff you've been working on previously, any lick, any exercise. And I think if you take the time with this one, you'll notice a big difference. So problem number 2 is getting those smooth string changes, because it's very easy to get into this type of stuff. We kind of overpick everything, and anyone can hear when you're changing strings, and you totally lose that legato illusion or legato feel. And a really good exercise to get rid of this is this one. You can apply this to any scale you're working on, but I would start with just a fingering. So do these 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 4, 1, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4 type fingerings. If you start with those, you will be much better equipped going to your scales. All right, so I'm going to demonstrate this one with this fingering, 1, 2, 4, since we've already been doing it. So we're just going to go up 1, 2, 4 on each string, from the E string up to the high E string. And it's going to be 5, 6, 8 on each string. So that's our scale. So the exercise is quite simple to understand, but can be tricky to execute. So we're going to start by doing 3 notes at a time. So we're going to start with the first 3 notes. That's our first group. Then we're going to go to the next set of 3 notes, starting from the second note here. So we got 2 plus 1. And then we're going to do the same thing again, but starting from this note and go 1 plus 2 pretty much. And then when you've done that, you've exhausted all the combinations. We're going to restart that on the A string. 3, 2 plus 1, 1 plus 2, 3, 2 plus 1, 1 plus 2, and so on until you reach the high E string. So those are the groupings, and it's going to be the same thing going backwards as well. So within these 3 note groupings, we're going to apply a subdivision of 4. So what's going to happen is we're going to get this moving accents effect. So if we have the first group of 3 here, and we actually think of 4 notes, they're gonna go like this: 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, and finally 1, 2, 3, 4. So the accent will move from the first finger, second finger, fourth finger, and then we're back where we started. So if we play that, it's gonna sound like this. So that's the first grouping. So the idea here is not to overdo the accents or anything like that. You're gonna get this accent automatically just by the fact that we're doing basically 16th notes. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. But you want to try to keep everything as even as possible. And especially when we get to the string changes. And that's gonna be in the next group of 3. So this one's just... So I usually pause like that. And I don't do this tempo generally. And then I start on the next fingering or the next group. Do the same thing, but now we need to keep the tempo intact, and also we need to make sure that we don't overpick the string changes. I tend to use hybrid picking in conjunction with legato because I find that it's very easy once you get into it. So you don't need to learn hybrid picking if you don't want. Just pick it any way that you normally do, and you need to learn how to get these string changes to sound the same anyway. So basically what we want to do now is to make sure that we don't get this effect. That's way overdoing it obviously. But you want to try to keep it as even as possible and keeping the rhythm correctly as well. So like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Play that again without counting. So the goal here is to get the string changes as even as possible. So basically it should sound the same as this one, as much as possible. And it's tricky because you don't want to overdo it either, so you get these notes overlapping, but you want to get it as close as possible to get as much of a legato sound as you can. So that's the first two groups, and then the next group is the same thing. It's just going to be a different challenge because it feels different to play one note here and two notes here. But we apply the same thing. We just overlay this group of 4 again. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. And continue on. And go on like that. And then once you reach the top, so the last one will be, we're gonna turn it around, and you can just start where you're at if you want. So just go down here, since we pause in between anyway, so you don't really need to move up. So if you go down in the same position, you're just gonna turn everything around backwards. So we still have 3 notes, 2 plus 1, 1 plus 2. But now we're gonna be descending on each string instead. And now it's a perfect opportunity to practice that first tip, meaning getting the pull-offs correct here when we do the descending version. So we're gonna start on the first string. So as you can see here, I get these 2 fingers down at the same time. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. The next group. Next group. And so on, and you continue on the same way. I suggest that you do this with 1, 2, 3. So you do the same thing, but you apply it to that fingering, and then 1, 2, 4 as we did, and then 1, 3, 4, and then 2, 3, 4. So the same thing, just 3 groups of 3 ascending, 3 groups of 3 descending, and then you apply this grouping of 4 on top of it. And you want to change the area of the fretboard up as well. So maybe one day you do it here in the 5th position, then tomorrow maybe you go up to 10, and then to 2, and then to 14 or whatever. Just make sure to change that up because you want to be able to do this all over the fretboard. And if you find these to be super boring to do, you can always apply it to the scale patterns instead. So either way works, but this one is extremely helpful for evening out those string changes. So make sure you don't overthink this stuff. Just make sure that you listen when you practice. That's the most important thing. And try to get as few mistakes in as possible, and that will really improve your technique over time. If you enjoy these type of exercises, make sure to check out my guitar gym. You have a link in the description. It's available as a standalone thing on Teachable, but also as part of my Patreon.